All right, by now you have seen EA Sports' top 10 list for the college football video game that's going to come out this year on difficult places to play. In fact, let's just pull that up. Let's get right into it. Richie and I are going to give you our lists in case you care. We're going to talk about Doak. We're going to talk about some of our rivals and some different things on here. But Richie, I got a problem with number one here in Kyle
Yes.
Field.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not saying that it's not a tough place to play, but I mean, okay, so kind of like the committee, right? You can't rank Florida State behind Alabama and then keep them ahead of Georgia. If your whole thing was to go based on record and how good teams have been there and all of that stuff, they're 24-20 in the since the game came out. Since the game came out 10
In
years ago.
SEC play, yeah.
Yeah, they're not good at home. Like, how is that number one? Like, I think that's a terrible pick. I don't agree with Kyle Field number one at all. I guess I'm fine with it, like top 10-ish. Like they get loud. But I mean, the numbers just don't bear out that that's a very tough place to play. And it's not like A&M's been lacking for talent. Like it's a tough place to play and you just don't have a lot of good players. Like they're the most talented team the most times that they play. Like they lost to UF there when UF like went 6-7 under Mullen. Like they lost to what that group of five school group of five school a couple years. Was it App State? They've not been good at home. So I don't know. That to me, that's the worst one on this entire list.
Not top 10. Like, I'm sorry. I know they have a
top 10.
Massive capacity, and it's respectful. Their fans do care. Like they care a lot. But to your point, TJ, this is a team that has, especially in the past 3 years or so, more talent than any team that's walked into that stadium, and they regularly lose. And that's just, I don't get it. I know they released their formula, or the cliff notes of their formula. EA Sports College Football did, but yeah, to me, they're not even top 10. I'm not sure they're top 15. When you have that much talent and you lose as often as you do at home, I don't care if all your cultish fans get out there at midnight to practice yelling. It doesn't do anything for me because I need to see results on the field, and mainly for big games. And that's not even talking about, to your point, App State going in there and beating them. It's just ridiculous to me that they would be number one. Like I said, we're going to do our top 10s. We're not going to do our top 25. We're not going to keep y'all for an hour. But yeah, not in my top 10, probably not in my top 20, maybe top 25.
Yeah, I think I could see them in my top 20, but certainly not number one. I think Neyland's tougher than them, and Neyland got left off this. Okay, some other problems I have. I don't like Wisconsin on here. I think that's way too high. They've got there's cool traditions and stuff, but like Lane Stadium at Virginia Tech is a cool tradition. I don't think it's that high. I don't really love Bryant-Denny, Sanford Stadium, or Oklahoma on here. I think the difference in those three places and like truly intimidating places to play are just that like they're better than everybody that plays them at home. Like Georgia never has to play, and I know Florida's down right now, but Georgia never has to play their biggest rival at home. So like that, they never have to play that. So like they're not playing any good teams. Like good teams, how many great teams are going into Athens? Not many. They play
Especially
in the SEC.
In the East.
Yeah, they played in the East forever. And I know the East isn't there anymore, but like it was on these bases. Oklahoma, they always get to play Texas at a neutral site. There's nobody good in the Big 12. Now it's going to get tested this year, right? Like we'll see how. And then Bryant-Denny, Alabama has been better, more talented than every other team that's ever come to Bryant-Denny for the last since Saban got there. And so, I don't know that I like Bryant-Denny there either. And we'll talk about ours here in a moment. But like I don't think any of those are really that tough of a place to play. I think they're tough because the teams that play there are so good. Neyland's a tougher place to me. Like stadium for stadium, Neyland's tougher to me than all three of those. The Swamp is tougher to me than all three of those.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think Bryant-Denny is so hard to kind of gauge, just because, to your point, they've always had the best roster of any team that's walked in there. outside of maybe Georgia. I don't know if Georgia's played there in the past 2 or 3 years, but
2020, but
yeah,
Alabama was still better then.
and I don't count 2020 too much. I do give some credit to that 2020 season in some games, and I'll get to that later on my list. But man, yeah, that's we'll see. I don't know. I disagree a little bit on Oklahoma. And to be fair, I've only been to a few stadiums on my list and not many on this list. So a little bias will creep into my list. So, go find someone who's been to every stadium if you want the true that someone else, but even they're biased. One of the lists I saw today was a good one, but he played at the stadium that he had listed very high. So I won't even go there. But yeah, I just looking at this, Wisconsin. Yeah. Jump around. That is on me and my wife's bucket list. We want to go to a Wisconsin game, but if you're a football player at an elite college level, which you are if you're playing in that stadium and it's not an out of conference game, typically, that's not going to intimidate me.
Yeah, I don't think
Like I'm gonna look around and say, "Oh, this is pretty cool." All right, now let's go run our first play. Like it's just that simple. Yeah, and to be fair, it's not a horrible list. It's really not, but there are some major issues with it. And I'll defend some of their choices, and I'll have issues with others of their choices when we get into our top 10. But man, it's just exciting that in the marketing, shout out marketing at EA Sports, they're doing a different list every day this week, less than a month from the release of the game. That's how you do it. And I already bought my
It's got everybody
PS5. We
talking.
talked about it, and here we
Yeah.
are talking about it, right? And we're gonna have 10,000+ people watch this just to see what they said and what we say.
Yeah. We'll look at our lists here in just a second, but which this will come out when I throw our lists up here. Yeah, I think I'd have Jordan Hare. I know you're not gonna like this, and if Lindsay watches this, you won't. I think I'd have Jordan Hare over Bryant Denny. I just think that's like a weirder, like it's closer to the field is closer. Weird things seems to happen there. And again, it's hard to judge Alabama based on I don't think Sanford Stadium's an intimidating place to play. I think that to me, I think if you look at it 10 years ago, and that's how I kind of tried to think about it. Was Sanford Stadium a tough place to play 10 years ago? I mean, Georgia was a good team then, but they're not what they are now. I think I'd rather play at Sanford than Neyland again. And before Saban, was Bryant Denny, obviously going way back, yes. But was Bryant Denny that much of a tougher place to play than, some other places, so certainly not Death Valley or, and I know we hate the Gators, but I mean, I have the Swamp pretty high on mine. As much as I hate them and I hope they lose every game, the Swamp is a tough place to play at times. So anyway, all right, let's look at our list. So the only thing we really truly agree on here is that LSU is number one. And so as somebody who has been to LSU, in 2016, Alabama was ranked number one, I believe. LSU may have been number 10. And Jalen Hurts threw a pass. I was down at, kind of end zone. And Jalen Hurts threw a pass from his own end zone. And it was intercepted 30 yards down the field. LSU caught it, and it was in the first quarter. They were still super lit. It was a 7 p.m. game, Alabama LSU, and I've never been in any my ears legitimately were hurting. It felt like the place was shaking. And I've been to Death Valley. I've been to the Swamp. I've obviously been to several games at Doak. I've been to a lot of things, right? And international soccer matches with 100,000 people in the stadium and stuff like that. I've never experienced anything like that in my entire life. And my biggest regret of the last 2 years is that we didn't play a game in Baton Rouge. I know I'm glad we won and went 2-0, but I wish our fan base could have experienced, the younger crowd, because I'm sure some of the older ones did go in the 80s. I wish they could have experienced what Baton Rouge felt like, because it was unlike anything I've ever. As much as I love Doak, I mean, you have a pretty good time watching the game of the Swamp or Death Valley, or Clemson or wherever. LSU is by far number one. And I've been to some big UF games, like when they beat Auburn, when Auburn came in number 5 in like 2019 or so. I've been to some big games there, and nothing compares to LSU. Like, it is undoubtedly number one. I will get right back to chatting with Richie about stadiums and where the toughest places to play in America are. But first, let me give some love to the Mango Board. I appreciate them for all their support this month here during National Mango Month. We've asked you this and we've told you about it all month long, but if you're not grabbing a couple of mangoes when you check out at your local grocer, Publix, Costco, Target, wherever you're at, make sure that you grab a couple. And I told you yesterday, grab a picture of one and tag me on social media, and let's try and give something away here on doublefriesnoslaw.com. I appreciate the Mango Board for their support of not only FSU Athletics, but also our channel. And again, make sure that you're grabbing a couple of mangoes the next time you're out at your local grocer.
Yeah. Do you want to start top to bottom or work backwards? I know we got the whole list up there, but just, looking at it, first I'll comment on
You can give
LSU.
yours. Yeah, you can go yours. We got them both up there. You can give your reasoning, run through them real quick, and I'll do mine. We're already at 10 minutes. So run through your 10 real quick.
We'll go back and forth. I'll start at 10. And this is, only somewhat tongue in cheek. Camping World for Florida State has been very friendly. They are undefeated in their last 12 games there. Wins over LSU, Notre Dame, Ole Miss, Wisconsin, Oklahoma. Sure, there's a Duke and a Wake Forest and a Virginia Tech in there, but Virginia Tech, that's not a bad win. So I kind of put that on there somewhat jokingly, but it just goes to show that, Orlando is the most central part in Florida, obviously Central Florida. And, the fact that they are undefeated in their last 12 games, 10-0-2 with the wins over the teams I just noted, if TJ, we were both at the Oklahoma game. We were both at the LSU game in the past 2 years. That crowd was electric. And I do think it played a role. I think Florida State beats LSU regardless last year, but the score probably looks a little different if it was, in any other venue outside of Doak. If it was in Doak and Mike really wanted to pour it on, I think he could have. Their only late touchdown came against a bunch of freshmen. Yeah, I truly think Camping World. Just a real quick 30-second thoughts on Camping World with Florida State.
Yeah, I mean, it's we've talked about how far away most of Florida State's fan base is from Tallahassee, how hard it is to get to Tallahassee. When you put it in the middle of the state where most of the fans live, or if they live in Atlanta or Charlotte, it's such an easy flight to get to Orlando. Shout out to FSU fans for absolutely dominating and taking over that city. I mean, it was easier for Florida State fans to get to New Orleans than it usually is for Tallahassee with how easy flights are and stuff. So let alone Orlando.
Yeah, you want to go your number 10? We'll just go back and forth.
I threw the big house in here. I mean, I think Michigan's a tough place to play, especially when you think about like how cold it is, and I factored weather in, and 100,000 people and things like that. Like I think that's you got the weather coming off of Lake Michigan. Like to me, I think that's tougher. This is my only Big Ten one. Well, I guess you got Outson now with Oregon in there, but well, no, I got Beaver Stadium too. So yeah, I've got that kind of high. But yeah, I've got the big house. I think it's tougher than Ohio State. You got Ohio State pretty high on yours. We'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I think the big house is a really tough place to play. I also think to me, Michigan fans, and this is my take, this is my perspective. You can tell me what you think. I think Michigan fans are a little bit more like blue collar, get in your face, like not as much the wine and cheese crowd as you might get in Columbus. I'm not saying that all Ohio State fans are wine and cheese, but like Columbus feels like a little bit more of like a prim and proper, and like Michigan fans are like your drunk redneck family that you're like. So I factored that in too. Like I think
that's what you wanted a college football game though.
Yes, absolutely. I got no problem. You all are my people. I'd love to. But yeah, I just factored Ann Arbor being a little bit tougher. Tougher to get to, tougher travel. Not a ton, but a little bit tougher than Columbus as well. So yeah, I got the big house as my number 10.
Yeah, so I'll go to my number 9, Georgia. And to your point, I don't even think you have this listed. Overrated. I think it's probably ranked really high on a lot of recent lists. But to your point again, TJ, I think that's based mostly on the talent. Just because their record shows that, wow, what a tough place to play. But when you have a 89% blue chip ratio or whatever it may be, and you're playing a team with a 42% blue chip ratio, yeah, you're going to win most of your games. I've never been to a game there, but I truly think that it's more of a product of the record when you see them ranked very high. I do give an edge to SEC fans. Some people may not like to hear that, but the SEC fans love college football more than anybody. I do not think that's debatable. So I did rank them at number 9 for me, and I'm a little upset I didn't really even consider your number 9 because I actually agree with that being in the top 10 right now.
Yeah, like again, it's a tough place to play. It's not the biggest. It's not 100,000 people, but Carter Finley, like weird things happen there. Their fans are, I mean, shout out Hunter, but like some of their fans are just absolute jerks, and they make it tough. And they're into
Just
games,
bottle on
and
the field.
like that is a tough place to play, and they're not. To me, like, Alabama goes in there, Alabama's going to win that game because they're so much better. But a team that goes in there with a similar amount of talent to NC State is in trouble. Or a team that's better. Look at 2012. Look at times Clemson's gone in there and lost. Like, look at times Miami. Like, Miami, like, dominated them, had more yardage last year. And still, like, weird things just happen up there at Carter Finley. And NC State found a way to win. So, yeah, I think that's I kind of tried to like eliminate how good a team was in my mind, right? And so like, yeah, I mean, you put UGA and Carter Finley, they're going to win next year, right? Like no big deal. But like you put UF up there and UF's losing that game. Like they just are, right? Like that's just you put similar talent levels and team levels, and obviously coaching would be lower for UF than NC State. But I think that's a tough, pound for pound. Like if I'll say this, if Carter Finley could fit 100,000 people, it'd be in the top 5 without a doubt. Like I'm telling you that if they had that many people donating in the program. So yeah, number 9, Carter Finley. What about your number 8?
Number 8, I'm going to Oklahoma, and I struggled with this because it was going to be either Oklahoma or Texas, and I couldn't put them above Georgia or my obscure number 10. So we'll just ignore that one right now for the purpose of this debate. But I do think Oklahoma does have a true home field advantage. I've never been there, but I've listened to several firsthand accounts. Florida State went up there in 2010, obviously 47-17. I'm not putting that into the sole reason. That was Jimbo's first year. It was whatever. But I just think when you watch an Oklahoma home game, and on Saturdays, if I'm feeling like I want to wager on it, I'm probably leaning Oklahoma before I even look at the spread. And I see it. I might change my thoughts. But, man, they just seem like they care. There's not a whole lot to do. Who cares about the Thunder in Oklahoma, really? Sure, they support the team. They're happy to have stolen from Seattle. But if you're in the state of Oklahoma, you are a Sooners fan before anything else. And I think the fans proved that. That's why I chose Oklahoma Memorial.
So I kind of shared my thoughts earlier, so I won't belabor the point. But, yeah, to me, it's still tough with Oklahoma because it's hard to judge them based on the talent that they've really played.
Yeah. That's fair.
Who was the last big time win that Oklahoma had in Oklahoma, right? And so that would be my quip with them.
And earlier you mentioned Georgia.
Same thing with Georgia.
Anybody at home. Yeah, like I would love Georgia, Florida, and Oklahoma, Texas to be home and homes every single year.
Yes,
it's cool. It's cool. The neutral site, whatever. Nah, man, I would love if I'm a Texas fan. I would love to make that trip to Oklahoma.
Yeah,
to Norman.
Even if you did a 4-year rotation, like you played Gainesville one year, and then Atlanta the next year, and then Jacksonville the next year, and then Athens the next year, and you just you kind of rotate.
Be amazing.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun. So, all right, Autzen Stadium there in Oregon, Eugene. I factored in travel here. I think it's just a weird place to play. Usually it's wet, usually it's cold, never like ideal, perfect conditions. Although it was when Colorado went up there. It was a pretty nice day in late September. I remember watching it after we beat Clemson this year. But yeah, I think that's a weird place to travel to. Their fans are, again, kind of like you said, there's nothing to do in Eugene, Oregon. Their fans really get into it. I think that's a tough place to play. Kind of weird travel. Going to the West Coast is always weird for people. Seems like it's easier to travel to the East Coast than it is to go to the West Coast when that's a big game. Now, obviously, if you're out there on the West Coast, no big deal. But yeah, I think that's a tough place to play. And I'd have it in my top 10. They've won a lot of big games out there.
Yeah. So I'll go to my number 7, Beaver Stadium, Penn State. Man, that's a bucket list item for me. And my thoughts here is if every game was a night game whiteout, it's top 3 and it's not number 3. Like I truly believe that atmosphere just looks electric. My best friend's in-laws both went to Penn State, and they've told me their stories, and it just sounds like an atmosphere that cannot be touched in that specific setting. The problem for me is the Big Ten, and hopefully Florida State doesn't have to deal with this. If we do end up in the Big Ten, you get a lot of noon games. That you very very rarely get primetime games, but I just think their fans are very very passionate, and I would love to experience a game there. Like I said, preferably a night game whiteout, because I don't think it gets a whole lot better than that. We'll get to where we're at the top of the list, but I might have undervalued them here a little bit, because I'm thinking of all the noon games that they do host, but those primetime whiteouts, man, that seems beyond special. And I know you have them up a little higher on the list, so you don't have to comment too much here if you don't want to.
Yeah, I'll just say I echo your thoughts, and then I'll skip Beaver Stadium when I get to number 4. I think it's really, and we're not too far off, right? Like there's 133 teams, and we're 3 spots off, so I don't think we're not too far off on this. And a lot of years that I'd have Oklahoma top 15, I'd have Sanford top 15. They're just so we're not too far off on anything. But I agree. I mean, I think that's a tough. That wideout's intimidating. That weather's intimidating when it's really cold. They play a lot of noon kicks, but also like when they're playing Ohio State, Michigan, like those are Michigan State, those are night games. You think back to those big highlights in your mind of games they've won or lost close against those big teams, and they were all night games. And so I'm with you there. My 7 is Neyland. I've mentioned them a ton. I mean, I think 100,000 hillbillies doing that checkerboard and as drunk as they get, and tearing down goalposts and throwing it in the river. Like those people make it tough. Knoxville, Tennessee, like the whole town is painted orange. It's intimidating. The number of people you got, the number of people, the SEC passion, which SEC, Tennessee fans have SEC passion as much as anybody else does. I mean, Neyland Stadium's up there for me. So top 7. I could have flipped, 4 to 7 in any order, 4 to 8 in any order, and I'd have probably not batted an eye. But yeah, Neyland Stadium, a tough place to play for me.
Yeah, so most of the listeners by this point, I don't talk about it much, but they know I work in healthcare. I had to work 2 weeks at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, just like filling in. And I had 1 day off in 14 days. And I reached out to the University of Tennessee, and they gave me a private tour of the football stadium, from the locker rooms on the field. It was amazing.
That's cool.
And the funny thing about it, what I think, to your point, TJ, why you have this on this list, and I probably should have, but I'm not sure who I'd move down. It's about the same size as Doak, but instead of 80,000 at Doak before the Champions Club, they fit 100,000 in there. You are right next to each other, crammed in. If you're slightly overweight, you probably want to buy 2 seats just because it's that tight. But it makes the atmosphere, I would assume, like I said, I've never been there for a game, that much better. But I have friends. Luckily, I have a lot of friends that went to UF that have been to Knoxville. And they say, man, that was surprising how crazy that was. And the fact that after they beat Alabama a few years ago, and immediately on Google Maps, they had the coordinates of the goalpost in the river. That was just hilarious. Those fans care. So I definitely see where you get that from. And I believe it. And I will go right to one of the biggest rivals at number 6, Ben Hill Griffin. I think that is probably the loudest stadium I've ever personally been in. I think the construction of the stadium plays a huge role, right? The acoustics of it. If you've ever been in there, it's not like Doak, that's a traditional bowl. This place goes straight up, and it holds noise like you'd never understand. But when they've had big games against Florida State, especially at night, Florida State wins those games. So granted, the talent, I see it as even for the most part in most of those games. That's why I have Doak a little higher. You'll hear where I have them in shortly. But definitely, I want to give credit to Ben Hill Griffin. Top 6 is nothing to be ashamed of. I think it is an amazing atmosphere. I have a blast. I've been to more Florida State games in Gainesville than I have in Tallahassee. Part of that is living in Orlando for the past 12 years now. So it's an easy day trip as opposed to having to drive to Tallahassee, get a hotel, all this. And I've never had a bad experience. I think it helps that I'm typically at the game with UF fans who I'm friendly with, so it's not people heckling me or anything like that. But yeah, I will definitely give Ben Hill Griffin their due. That stadium is an electric atmosphere, especially when the game is right.
Yeah, so I have them higher. I have it at 2, and so I'll skip my 2 when we get to it. But yeah, I think it's, I do think Ben Hill Griffin at times like changes the way that the games are played. Like I think that's the only reason they beat Tennessee last year. Like they were not as good as Tennessee, and their record and Tennessee's record proved that out. And I think just there were so many false starts, and the quarterback couldn't get going, and just this, that, and the other. Holding, the offensive line struggled so bad in that game. And again, you're right. It's not that their fans are better by any means, but the way they built that stadium is much more. It is much. Better designed to hold the sound, and so it does get louder than Doak, and I have it higher than Doak. I think it's a tougher place to play than Doak. I think, it feels, for some reason it feels hotter. It feels hotter in the Swamp than it ever does in Tallahassee. Like I've been to some September games in both, and so yeah, I'd have it slightly higher. I mean, that said, I have Doak like shortly after, but yeah, I'd have Ben Hill Griffin a little bit higher. So my number 6, Jordan Hare, we talked about it. Just all the weird, fluky things that seem to happen there. I don't know if it's voodoo or magic or what, but yeah, I think that's a really tough place to play. Auburn fans, kind of the same as I talked about with Michigan. They're the Alabama fans are kind of your hoity-toity, and Auburn's a little bit more your drunk redneck family members. So I'd have Jordan Hare 6. You're up. Their rival for your number 5.
Yeah, I might have put too much emphasis on their home record here just because we talked about this. Their talent is just so much better. But I do have Bryant Denny. I don't think we're going to get the chance to go there as scheduled unless we are in the SEC. I think that game probably gets scrapped. But that's one game I cannot wait to get to. Also, my wife, lovely wife, is a huge Alabama fan. So I know she's going to watch this, and I didn't want to omit her team. But I do think Bryant Denny would be a special atmosphere. I think the difference, CJ, between you and I is you've actually been there and experienced it. Unfortunately, I have not. So, typically, if I'm not watching Alabama versus Vanderbilt on TV, I'm watching the big home games for Alabama, and I see that stadium and what it looks like. So I think that just contributes more to my bias on this list, which I've admitted is very biased. But I just do think, you can't count out Alabama. I mean, that's just. I do think if Kalen DeBoer gets this thing going the way that he hopes, I don't think he will necessarily, but it's going to be a tough place to play. And I think we'll have that verified within the next 3 or 4 years because he's not going to have the roster talent advantage that Nick Saban had every single week. He's going to recruit very well and at a high level, but he's going to have a lot more teams coming to that stadium more physically capable of beating them. And I think that will tell us more. So this is more of a potential projection of the future, I guess.
So I only have 2 left that we haven't talked about. So I'm going to do my last 2, and then I'll let you kind of ride out your last couple. But I have Doak next, and I'm okay. I don't want to upset people, but if you've watched 30 minutes of this episode, then you'll live through this. Outside of being an FSU fan and how special it is, like to me, like Doak isn't that loud. With the Champions Club and the renovations, it's about to get worse, which I know that wasn't really counted in. And so, like, I think it's a moderately tough place to play. I think what makes Tallahassee tough is the travel for opposing fans. I don't think you usually don't have that many other fans in. So it is truly like 70, 80,000 of just Florida State fans in there. And that helps a lot. I also think what makes it tough is just the intimidation factor, the war chant, the marching chiefs, Osceola planting the spear on Renegade. I think all those things are tough. I don't think in the third quarter when there's a point where you can't hear yourself think like what you get at LSU and UF, and so that's why it's a little bit lower for me. It's my favorite stadium experience, even after being to 7, 8, 9, 10 different stadiums. It's still my favorite. I just don't think it's top 1, 2, 3, 4 tough. It's probably not even top 5, but I'm biased and so slid it in here at number 5.
So counterpoint, I have Doak at number 3, so I can skip that coming up. But I think the biggest the biggest barrier to Florida State and Doak Campbell Stadium, as far as toughest environment, is playing in the ACC. I think if we played in the SEC or the Big Ten, and you had LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan coming here every other year, it's a whole different ball game. Because I was at the 2011 Oklahoma game, loudest stadium I've ever experienced in my life. Then you look at different games like 2013, Florida State and Miami, both 8-0, top 10 in the country. It was a blowout. I think the spread was 27.5. Florida State won by 28, but Jimbo could have ran that up a lot more if he wanted to. Then we think about even the COVID year with a limited capacity. You have a top 5 North Carolina come in, and Florida State knocks them off as a 17.5-point underdog. The next year, Notre Dame comes in with a much better roster. Florida State takes in the overtime, probably should have won the game. You can question some things there, but I just truly think that when Doak is right in a big game, and to be fair, we didn't really have a lot of, exactly what are we putting into this. In my thoughts, how do you perform in the biggest of biggest games in your home stadium? And what is that environment like? And Florida State checked every single box for me based on experience. Again, this might be some bias because I've obviously been to a ton of big games at Florida State, been to big games at UF, been to big games at Clemson, not many other, home college stadiums. That's kind of what did it for me to put them at number 3.
So we both have Clemson fairly close. You have them 4, I have them 3. That's a tough place to play. It's a tough place to watch a game. Like it's hot, man. I was way up high this year, and you got to walk all those hills and stuff, and it is brutal. But their fans do a really good job of being super nice before the game, and then want to kill you during the game, and their fans do great, and that's a tough place to play. There's nothing around. It's just like that's the only thing there in town. Clemson is again super high for both of us there. Quick thoughts on Clemson as we wind this thing down.
I know anecdotal data is something you just typically throw out the door, but 2013 just stuck out to me, which is why I put Doak just one ahead of them, because both teams, they were fairly evenly matched. That Clemson team kind of had their way with Ohio State in the Orange Bowl, and we all know what happened when Florida State went into Memorial Stadium at night when they were planning to set the record for noise at a football game. That's why I gave Florida State the edge just over Clemson Memorial, but I think they're 65-3 in the playoff era at home. So
they won like 40 games straight there. It's pretty ridiculous.
Like you cannot dismiss them. And if as unbiased person, if you were to tell me Clemson's ahead of Doak, I would not argue with you. I would make my argument. So I guess I would argue with you, but I wouldn't have a problem with you winning that argument.
So talked about Ben Hill Griffin on mine. I talked about Tiger Stadium in LSU. The only thing we haven't talked about is Ohio State. Ohio State number 2 for you. That surprised me. I don't even have them top 10. Let's hear it.
Yeah, no, I think that was interesting. I just think their fan base, to me, is extremely knowledgeable. And I think that goes a long way into the atmosphere at the game for opposing teams because they know when to get excited. I compare them a lot to Florida State baseball fans, that they understand if you get a stop on a 3rd and 8 and that they complete a 6-yard pass, they go nuts because they understand they're not going to go for it on 4th and 2. And just the size of the stadium. And I tried to take the size out, but I can't entirely. And it's such an easy stadium to get to, but not just for away fans, but also for Ohio State fans who are all over the state and all over the Midwest. I just think Ohio State, I need to get there to confirm this. I might have overrated them a little bit, but I don't think they're out of the top 10. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think they'd be in my top 20 for sure. Maybe top 15. I didn't even think through 15 through 10 or 11 through 20, but they'd be up there for me. I don't know they're top 10. I think I put Michigan just above them. So, all right, this was fun. You know who wasn't on anyone's list? But they would have been on another list. I think Miami is the most difficult to play for your own team because you have to do that 45-minute car ride. There's no fans there. There's no aura. You're renting a stadium. You're having to pay for your stadium instead of making money from having your own stadium. It's not good for the program. It's not good for the players. It's not good for the fans. I think Miami's the toughest place to play for your own team. So is that fair? Like they win that. To me, they win toughest place to play for your own team.
I would say they're damn close to top 15, maybe cracking the top 10 as toughest places to play for a home team. If you're looking at Florida State playing at Doak South, we all saw 45-3. Florida State, they always play well in that stadium. Ask Michigan. That Michigan team should have never lost to Florida State. They're Northern Illinois. Granted that wasn't a good team, but that's who Florida State had to play. I'd say Florida State has a much better home field advantage in that stadium than Miami does. So if anyone's going to look at the toughest places to play in that stadium, it's one, Miami Dolphins against the Patriots, because they always seem to beat them down there. And then it's Florida State against Miami or anyone else they play in a bowl game.
Yeah. Miami not close at all to being on this list. I don't know if they would have been in the top 100, just to be fair. I will say this. The one thing I will say, that Miami Notre Dame game when Coach Richt was there in 2018-ish,
17.
That was lit. I'll say that. They did pack it out. That was lit. They had
and they blew them out. Yeah, that was credit.
That game was lit. But you can't do one every decade and me give you credit. That's all the credit you get. So, all right, Richie, I appreciate you for jumping on here and doing this. This is a fun one. Took a little time on a what's today? Tuesday night. This will come out Wednesday morning. Hit the subscribe button if you watched 35 minutes of us ramble about stadiums. And give us your list. Shoot. Comment 10 below. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Go Noles.